where you have your own data from your own history, and you have often a pretty complicated mathematical model or a series of models joined together to work out your risks. So it's the same idea, but between Basel and solvency, it is totally different. In banking, if you set up a new bank today, you will do the standard approach, because you don't have the data, you don't have the history, that's how you do it. But after 3 or 5 years, you may produce your own data, have your own computer, build your own model, and get permission to use your own internal model. If you do, your capital requirements will be much lower. So the idea of Basel is to encourage you to build your own model, you then use less capital. Solvency is quite different. You don't say, I'm fed up with the standard, I want to use the internal. You've got to justify for your business either the standard approach is appropriate and you should use it forever, or it's not appropriate, which is often the case, and between different people here, you should have a different internal model according to your particular business. And whether you use the standard approach or the internal approach, it won't make much difference in the capital you need. So the problem with banking, it encourages cheating on the model. Once you put your model, you time to lower and lower capital. In insurance, there's much more encouragement to what we call responsible judgment to determine a model that's suitable for your business. And that is reflected in the regulatory submissions. Both banks and insurance companies must make submissions to their regulator, once a year or sometimes in between. Now, most of you here are pretty clever people. You have good degrees, or you will have, and good experience. So I promise you, if you went to any bank as a consultant tomorrow to help them fill in your regulatory submissions, you could do it. Because you would have a book called regulatory submissions, do this, do this, do this, and you could just follow the rules, take a bit of capital for credit risk, a bit of capital market risk, a bit for operation risk, and so on, add them up and get the answer. You wouldn't need to understand banking at all. If you're just reasonably sensible, this is very straightforward. You don't really know what it means, but you can do it. But you could not do this. I couldn't do it, even though I'm an actuary for a typical insurance company. To do the regulatory submission for an insurance company, you have to really understand the business and its risks, and how you chose your model to match these risks. Now, there are some other quite strong differences in Basel and solvency. I'll talk about two which are very important parts of Solvency II, but there are no equivalent in the Basel regulations. In insurance companies, there is a concept called the prudent person principle. So in an insurance company, if you buy an asset, there's a list of requirements. You must be able to manage it, to monitor it, to value it, to report it. So it must be a fairly simple, straightforward thing. Insurance companies are allowed to use derivatives, but only for legitimate hedging and efficient risk management, not for speculation. And of course, you're required to avoid concentration of risks. So this is all very sensible, and would avoid buying these toxic securities that banks bought. I think it's another advantage that it is a principle. In banking, there is no doubt, it's not my negative opinion. Everyone knows that the more rules, the more banks get around the rules. So if there were a prudent investment rule that you could buy these securities but not these ones, banks would find a way to repackage securities. There's a principle not to buy things that you can't understand properly. And I think this has been very helpful in the crisis, meaning that when you look to see who owned these toxic securities, in general, who are not owned by insurance companies, apart from the notable exception of AIG and some funny companies which were not really insurance companies but financial conglomerates, and that was a disaster. Now the present principle is important. The next one for me is even more important, most important of all, the actuarial function. As I said, I've never actually done any work as an actuary, but we know the reputation of actuaries as good at maths, quite clever, very boring, very dull, very risk averse. In an insurance company, you have a risk management function, quite large. And then there is a small actuarial function. What does it do? First of all, it looks at the risk models and the methodologies and the assumptions that are made. And in doing that looking, it must operate under professional standards. So the actuaries create a profession, they have ethical standards, which are obviously what you expect, including honesty, integrity, and they have technical standards as how to work out the sums. So you can't have the kind of cheating in insurance companies. Actuaries are very unlikely to go along with that. And in addition to that, the actuarial function must write to the board each year about all the aspects of risk management, and in the report they must identify any shortcomings and say what they have done to address them or what they're going to do to address them. So that is a very good discipline, that people must admit to problems. So I'm not naive that all actuaries are wonderful and that there will be no problem in an insurance company, but I think the role of the actuarial function, sitting alongside risk management function, clearly independent from the risk management, it must not be pressurized by the board or the management. This is a pretty good thing. And the final Basel versus solvency thing is about public disclosures. I said this has really been important in my experience. In the bad insurance company, it was all going wrong, but nobody knew. The chairman was mad, the asset liability mix was going all wrong, but there was no proper public disclosure. So there was no correction was made until it was basically too late. When I was at RBS, as a small bank, the chief executive was so scared to be taken over that he was very concerned the results showed consistent growth and no slip-ups. And subsequently, banks became too big to be taken over and didn't really care. But under the Basel regulation, the required disclosures are very limited. Banks have to disclose their credit risk, their market risk, and their operational risk. But typically in a bank, this will amount to about 1/2 of its total risks. So a bank does not have to disclose its total risks, its total capital requirements, or what the regulator thinks. For an insurance company, it's what you would want if you were investing in it. If I'm an insurance company, I have to disclose, and it's no big problem, the amount of capital I have, the amount of capital I must have, what the regulator's opinion is, if he's added any capital because I've got a problem, that must be disclosed, and so on. Everything you want is disclosed. Also, very importantly for some of the banking crisis and subsequent problems, the insurance company must disclose information about its own internal models. So not only have these actuaries, who are risk averse, looked at the models closely, but information has to be published so that the public, so that academics, whoever, can look at them, scrutinise, comment on them. In banks, it is absolutely never happens. You will never get a bank to disclose what model it's using. So as a shareholder, you have no idea. If you are a shareholder in the bank, you have no idea what is happening. And a very bad situation, what is supposed to be a market economy, is that you have to rely on the regulator or the regulations to avoid the bank going bust. You've no idea. If we all took home tonight the public disclosure of any large bank, RBS or what, Deutsche Bank, UBS, to come back tomorrow, does it have enough capital? We'd all say, no idea. I understand what all night, I've read hundreds of pages, I have no idea. I can understand the words, I can understand the numbers, what they mean, how they add up, I have no idea. So that's 6 episodes in my career and 6 differences between Basel and solvency. So I want to draw it together by thinking about what happened that led to the banking crisis, what happened after the banking crisis, and how do we wrap this up. Now, as many of you know, I'm doing a workshop tomorrow. That'll be different. Tomorrow, we're going to focus on the banking crisis and look more generally and say, was it the fault of the management? Was it the regulation? Was it the government? Was it the regulator? Was it hedge funds? That sort of thing. That's tomorrow. We're not talking about that tonight. We're simply talking about regulation against ethics. There were a number of banking failures. They were bunched in 2008. There have not been many insurance company failures. So I think we can say in insurance, in terms of what happened before the crisis, that there was no obvious failure in regulation. The problems were behaviour. It is very difficult regulations to stop these megalomaniac chief executives. That's more for the shareholders to do. So I think I'm not too worried about insurance. Now, before the banking crisis, or the cause of the banking crisis, as you will know, the single most important reason was that many banks, like RBS sadly, bought these CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, and CDSs, credit default swaps. So these were derivatives, they were over the counter, no idea what the price was or what they were worth. They were very complicated. I would find it very hard to understand them. My view was, you shouldn't own things unless you can understand them. My view was, I can understand them, no way the board can understand them. And of course it became toxic and lost huge amounts. Now, in terms of regulation ethics, in my very unhappy period before I left RBS over all this, I remember hearing 2 words spoken by the chief executive, Fred Goodwin. One was, if there's nothing against it in the rules, it's okay. This is just getting around the rules. We don't bother thinking, we don't bother making judgment. Look at the rules, it doesn't say, don't speed on this road, so we can go by Ferrari as fast as we like. If there's no rule against it, it's okay. No common sense, no thought. This was not an RBS problem, this was a universal bank problem. We go by the rules, okay, if it's a speed limit, we'll follow it, sort of. We might get around it. If there's no rule, fine, we can do what we like. And the other point I heard very often from Fred was, it's not our job to be ethical policemen. We shouldn't make moral judgments, we should just run the bank. So that allows all kinds of behaviour. Obviously, in insurance companies, the same wouldn't happen because of the prudent person principle and the code that applies to actuaries. So I left RBS very, very sad, having seen the bank build up and be successful for so many years, to be blown away in a puff of people buying these stupid securities. The policy of RBS had always been not to do proprietary trading, but just little by little by little, without anybody realising it. And it's the same in Merrill Lynch, UBS, Citigroup. Many of these banks, you saw when the information was disclosed, they didn't know what they had themselves. The dealers had hidden it in some reporting thing, didn't admit it was proprietary trading of they said they were AAA securities, that's okay. You know now that AAA meant triple Z. So what has been happening since the banking crisis? There's no particular change in insurance. Solvency II is coming in, if it ever happens. There's some debate as to when or how. But many companies, many insurance companies are basically following much of Pillar 2 already. Many insurance companies like the nature of the regulatory submission, where you choose a model that suits you and you report why you've chosen it. They're absolutely happy with the actuarial function, validating the models and giving transparency internally. They are probably not thrilled about very full disclosure. Nobody in a company really likes it, but they know it's the right thing to do, so they don't object to it. There are some technical points still under discussion. Some insurance companies think if under Pillar 1 you have too many rules, then that will create the evasion of rules. They're getting round the rules that happened in banks. So on the whole, insurance companies are very happy with Pillar 2 on the governance process. They are resigned or happy with Pillar 3 on disclosure, but there's a general fear that we don't want this compliance with a rules mindset from banks to take place in insurance by a very high degree of regulation of the models and then people getting around them. But insurance seems to be fine. I'm happy with Solvency II. I write papers in the UK in which I say the sooner we get on with Solvency II, the better. It's fine. It's certainly a lot better than Basel. Now, since the banking crisis, we've had enormously more rules. So we've gone from Pillar 1, Basel 1 was only 35 pages, Basel 2 was only this big, Basel 3 bigger and bigger and bigger. So since the banking crisis, we've had more and more and more rules. These rules superficially are sensible. You have to have a much higher capital ratio. And the amounts for credit risk or market risk must be calculated on a more conservative basis. We'll talk about some of these tomorrow morning. But the more and more and more there are rules and more rules and more rules, the more and more and more the banks are getting around the rules. So the principal problem, we've had these minor problems that are very sad of cheating on LIBOR or money laundering. That's just pathetic. But for me as a mathematician, as a risk manager, the principal problem is that banks are cheating in their models. So under Basel III, their capital ratios must be higher, much higher. So you might have to have a number like 10% compared to a number like 4%. So they go to the other side of the calculation on their risk models and reduce their risk-weighted assets, so that amazingly, the capital is not very different. So much more conservative capital ratios, not much more capital. And as it happens, I'm pleased to say the Bank of England has really been a leading force globally in talking about their concern. And this week they're going to make some announcement about UK banks with their concern. Banks have been cheating and don't have enough capital. Although they report capital ratios that look quite high, the amount of capital may not be enough. Now, this is called RWA, risk-weighted assets optimization. Optimization is, as you know, a cheating word. It just means flipping the numbers to get the number we want in the first place. And banks like RBS, Barclays, Lloyds, even have departments in their risk management called RWA optimization department. You know, we're the department that cheats and fiddles the numbers. So I think that this is either unlikely or impossible in insurance companies. First of all, I think it's very good that insurance companies don't have the too big to fail mindset. If you were at RBS and you're still there, you've been bailed out, the world's ended, you still get a job, you're one of 100 people making £1 million, this is quite okay. And the next time it goes wrong, although you might be slightly worried about Cyprus, but you're still pretty hopeful you'll be bailed out again. So once you're proven to be too big to fail, you know you can blue the company. If you make us advice the economy go to pot, so please bail us out again, or give us some more lending, or give us some help. The too big to fail mindset is very bad in banks. Insurance companies haven't been bailed out. They don't have that. They assume that if they go bust, as would happen in Equitable Life, the policyholders will take the loss. So that is not quite like RBS, which was initially so scared of being taken over, but it is really a very powerful force, the worry about a disaster compared to the mindset of too big to fail. And I can't emphasize this too much. When I was at RBS before I left, it was on and on and on about the banks being bust. One of the French arguments was, who cares? It's the government's problem, it's not my problem, who cares? The too big to fail mindset is very big. I'm not going to make any comments on the implications for Slovenia. I don't know enough about Slovenia. I know you've had some problems. But globally, big banks are evil empires. Banking is a good profession. Banking is serving the public. It's essential for economic growth. The Greeks knew this fine. The Venetians knew this fine. But big banks get into this megalomania mindset very quickly. So too big to fail is a very important differentiator between banking and insurance. The second one is the actuarial function. This does put a discipline on the bank. Now I, at RBS, raised my concerns, but who cares? Had I been an actuary in my role, an official actuary, not just as it happens an actuary, at RBS, I could have produced a yellow card or a red card and said to the chief executive, look, you've had it. You've got to do what the actuarial function says before the thing goes bust. But in banks, there is no such